On a rainy evening, a powerful CEO opened an envelope he never expected to see. Inside was a simple letter, written in the uneven handwriting of a little girl, each word trembling with honesty. Those lines would shake his world more than any business deal, forcing him to face the past he thought was buried forever. And before we begin, let me send you my warmest wishes of peace and health. Tell me, from which country are you listening to this story? And at what time of day? Ethan Walker stood by the window of his high-rise penthouse in downtown Boston, gazing down at the glowing streets below. Cars streamed like silver threads through the city, headlights blending into the neon haze. From this height, the bustle seemed distant, muffled yet inside his apartment. The silence felt louder than the traffic. Sometimes Ethan thought the quiet had a weight of its own, pressing against him, reminding him how empty his life really was. At 52, he had achieved what many only dreamed of, founder and CEO of a tech empire that had reshaped markets. His name carried respect in boardrooms from New York to Silicon Valley. Yet within these gleaming walls, there was no laughter, no hurried footsteps of family, no dinner table waiting. Only stock reports stacked neatly on his mahogany desk, half-finished glasses of Bordeaux, and the sharp chime of his phone reminding him of yet another deal. Boston was deep into autumn. Red and golden leaves swirled along Commonwealth Avenue. Even the air carried the scent of cinnamon and baked apples drifting from corner bakeries where families lined up for pies to share after supper. But for Ethan, the seasons blurred together one quarter, one fiscal year after another. Still, when he stepped onto the balcony, he could sometimes hear the faint toll of church bells from Beacon Hill. That sound tugged at memories of Vermont, where he'd grown up. Sunday evenings in his hometown were always the same. Family gathered around a worn wooden table, a roasted chicken in the middle, mashed potatoes on the side, and his father bowing his head before they ate. Those memories felt locked in a drawer now, only rattled open by the winds of autumn. For the past 2 years, he had shared part of his life with Vivian, a sharp and ambitious woman who knew how to move in Boston's elite circles. She accompanied him to galas and charity events, her hand perfectly placed on his arm, her laughter chiming at all the right moments. But beneath the shimmer of gowns and champagne, there was a distance Ethan could never bridge. Vivian cared for appearances, for her place in society, for the company's reputation. Rarely, if ever, did she ask what truly weighed on his mind. He saw it, and yet sometimes let himself ignore it, because it was easier to have someone there than to sit across from an empty chair. That was the price of his success. Relationships built on convenience, not warmth. That evening, he returned from another grueling board meeting, where expansion into Asia had dominated the agenda. The private elevator opened into his apartment with a soft chime, but what greeted him was the same cold stillness. His footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor like he was trespassing in his own home. Ethan shrugged off his coat, poured a glass of wine, and sank into the leather sofa. The city lights cut across his face, one side in shadow, the other washed in neon. He switched on the television, more out of habit than interest, the financial news anchor's voice blending into background noise. At 9 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. Marcus, his longtime advisor and one of the few people who dared speak honestly to him, was on the line. "Ethan, are you coming to the Autumn Festival this weekend? Everyone will be out in the square." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "Marcus, you know crowds aren't for me. Festivals are for families, for kids, not for men like me." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing what he had admitted. Not for someone who doesn't have anyone to go with. There was silence on the line. Then Marcus's voice, steady and kind. "Maybe that's exactly why you should go. Sometimes we need to step outside our routine, not for business, but to remember there's more to life than balance sheets." Ethan ended the call and leaned back, the wine untouched. His gaze drifted once more to the cityscape, where leaves tumbled in the wind like sparks across the night. He owned more than most could dream of, yet the thought came unbidden. Money couldn't buy the sound of footsteps running to greet him, or a child's laughter echoing in these cold rooms. For years he had convinced himself that fatherhood was impossible after all. The doctors had said he was sterile. He had taken that as a sentence, building walls around his heart, refusing to let anyone close enough to prove otherwise. The irony was bitter. He had built towers of glass and steel across the city, yet inside he was more fragile than he dared admit. Ethan rose from the sofa and wandered through the penthouse, glass in hand. Every corner of the apartment reflected his taste: Italian leather chairs, abstract art, shelves lined with awards and business magazines that bore his face. But what was missing were the simplest things. No framed family photos, no school drawings pinned to the refrigerator, no quilt folded on the arm of the couch that smelled faintly of home. The silence pressed harder as he opened the fridge. Rows of imported sparkling water and fine cheeses stared back. He closed it again without taking anything, realizing how long it had been since he had sat down to a meal with someone who wasn't a business associate. A soft knock on the door startled him. It was only room service, delivering a package he had forgotten he ordered. The young man at the door smiled politely, handing over the box. Ethan tipped him generously old habits of wealth, but the boy's thanks reminded him of how rare genuine gratitude sounded. Once the door closed again, Ethan stood holding the package without opening it. The apartment felt emptier than before. He carried the wine glass back to the balcony, stepping out into the crisp October air. Boston stretched wide beneath him. The golden dome of the State House gleamed faintly in the distance. The harbor shimmered under the moonlight, and the hum of the city carried upward like a lullaby. From far below came the faint bark of a dog, the laughter of a couple passing by, and somewhere, a group of college students shouting cheerfully after a game. Those voices, those lives, carried warmth he could only observe, but never touch. Inside, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Vivian. Board dinner tomorrow at the Four Seasons. Wear the gray Armani, it photographs better. Ethan stared at the words for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the counter. Not a single word about how he was, or what he might be feeling. Just an instruction, another expectation. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The life he had built was impressive to the world, yet empty in the places that mattered. He poured the untouched wine down the sink and washed the glass, almost mechanically. The act reminded him of how his mother used to hum while rinsing dishes after supper. The kitchen filled with steam and the smell of soap. Those small, ordinary rituals had once meant security, belonging. Now, even the sound of running water felt foreign in this sterile kitchen. As midnight neared, Ethan walked into his study. The large mahogany desk was cluttered with reports, but his eyes were drawn to a single photograph tucked into a drawer. It was an old picture of him, as a younger man, standing with Lila Dawson, a woman whose laughter had once lit up his world. He hadn't seen her in over a decade. Their story had ended too quickly, tangled by ambition and distance. Ethan stared at the faded image, the corners bent from years of neglect. He wondered, not for the first time, what life would have been if he had chosen differently. He shook his head and pushed the photo back, closing the drawer firmly as if to lock away the thought. "No use digging up ghosts," he muttered, though the echo of her smile lingered long after the drawer shut. By 1 a.m, Ethan was lying on the bed, city lights spilling through the blinds like broken stripes of gold across the room. He folded his arms under his head, staring at the ceiling. Sleep did not come easily. His mind circled Marcus's words. Sometimes we need to step outside our routine to remember there's more to life. But what else was there, really, for a man like him? He turned onto his side, finally allowing exhaustion to drag him under. The city kept breathing below, unaware of the storm that was about to ripple through Ethan's carefully built world. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, he had no idea that tomorrow a little girl would step into his empire and change everything. The lobby of Whitmore Tower was a place designed to impress. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers, glass walls reflected the morning sun, and the air carried the faint aroma of roasted coffee from the Starbucks across the street. Men and women in tailored suits hurried past with their lattes and briefcases, their shoes clicking sharply as they rushed for the elevators. It was the rhythm of downtown Boston on a weekday morning, fast, polished, impersonal. In the midst of it all stood a little girl, clutching a crumpled envelope to her chest. Sophie Dawson's coat was too big for her small frame. The sleeves rolled twice so her hands could poke out. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail that had already started to slip. She looked like she had walked a long way, her cheeks pink from the cold, but her eyes were bright with determination. Sophie hesitated at the security desk, watching grown-ups scan their badges and stride past without noticing her. A few glanced down, frowning, before moving on. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the reception counter. Grace Miller, the young receptionist with auburn hair and a kind smile, looked up from her computer. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" Grace asked gently. Sophie shook her head and placed the envelope on the counter. "I need Mr. Whitmore to read this. It's from my mom." Her voice was small but steady, like she had rehearsed it all morning. Grace blinked, surprised. Children didn't usually appear in this glass and steel world. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Do you mean Ethan Whitmore, the CEO?" Sophie nodded firmly. "Yes, it's very important." Grace hesitated, glancing toward the elevators. Protocol said she should call security, but there was something in Sophie's eyes and earnestness that reminded her of her little cousin, so she reached for the envelope. It was wrinkled from being held tightly, but the handwriting on the front was neat and familiar. "To Ethan Whitmore." "All right," Grace whispered. "I'll make sure it gets to him." "M?" Sophie's shoulders relaxed, though she still clutched the strap of her faded backpack. "Thank you," she said softly. Grace smiled. "Would you like to sit for a bit? I can get you some water." But Sophie shook her head. "I should go back. Mom's waiting." She turned and walked quickly toward the revolving doors, disappearing into the stream of morning commuters. Grace held the envelope for a moment longer, feeling the weight of responsibility. Then she slipped it into the delivery pouch that would be taken upstairs to the executive floor. On the top level of Whitmore Tower, Ethan sat behind his massive desk, reviewing numbers on a screen larger than most home televisions. His assistant entered with a stack of folders and, on top, the small envelope. "This was left downstairs," she said crisply. "By a child." Ethan frowned. "A child?" "Yes. The receptionist said she insisted you receive it." The assistant placed the envelope on the desk and left. Ethan stared at it, irritated. He had no time for distractions, especially childish ones. But something about the handwriting made him pause. He reached for his letter opener, slit the top carefully, and unfolded the paper inside. The first line froze him. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means Sophie found the courage to bring it to you." His breath caught. Sophie. Lila's daughter. The words blurred as memories flickered. A younger version of himself walking with Lila through Harvard Square, laughing over coffee in a corner cafe, whispering promises under falling leaves. They had been inseparable once, until ambition pulled him away. He blinked hard and forced himself to keep reading. "She deserves to know you. I never stop caring. Please, don't turn her away." The letter trembled in his hands. He read it again, then again, each word cutting deeper. He had built an empire, but in this moment, all he felt was the absence of the woman he had loved and the possibility that the little girl who had walked into his tower was his. Ethan sat motionless in his leather chair, the letter spread open on his desk. The words carried more weight than any contract he had ever signed. He rubbed his temple, trying to slow his racing thoughts. Lila. It had been years since he had even spoken her name aloud, yet here she was, reaching through time and distance with a plea. And Sophie, the girl in the lobby, had she really crossed half the city just to deliver this? He swiveled his chair toward the window, Boston Harbor stretching beyond the glass. Cargo ships drifted slowly. Gulls wheeled above, and the sky was streaked with late-morning sunlight. It should have been an ordinary Tuesday, but everything suddenly felt altered. Vivian's voice broke his reverie. She entered the office briskly, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "You missed the investor call," she said, without greeting. Then her eyes fell on the paper in his hand. "What's that?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He folded the letter carefully, almost protectively. "It's personal." Vivian arched an eyebrow. "Personal? At 10 in the morning? That's unlike you." She crossed her arms. "Is it from some old flame? Because if it is, let me remind you, women show up with claims all the time once a man has money. They want a payout, Ethan. Nothing more." Her tone was sharp, dismissive. Ethan felt a flicker of irritation, but more than that, doubt. Could Vivian be right? Was this some elaborate attempt to pull him down, to strip him of what he had built? He glanced at the letter again. The handwriting was unmistakably Lila's, looping and graceful, just as he remembered. "She says the girl is mine," Ethan said quietly. Vivian laughed, a short, cutting sound. "Yours? Ethan, the doctors told you years ago you couldn't have children. Do you really think suddenly a miracle appeared?" "No, This is manipulation. Don't fall for it." The words struck him like cold water. Yes, the doctors had told him he was infertile. He had carried that truth like a scar. But Lila, would she lie about something like this? He closed his eyes, trying to remember her as she was not through the lens of years or Vivian's scorn, but as the woman who had once believed in him before the world knew his name. Vivian stepped closer, her voice softening but still edged. "Ethan, you have a company to run, a reputation to protect. Don't get dragged into some fantasy about a child that isn't yours. Forget about this letter, shred it, and let's move on." But Ethan couldn't. His hand tightened around the paper, the way Sophie had clutched it when she walked into the building. For the first time in years, the certainty he lived by cracked. After Vivian left, frustration simmering in her stride, Ethan remained at the desk, staring at the city that now seemed unfamiliar. He opened the drawer, pulled out the letter again, and read it one more time. Each line carried not just words, but memories. Evenings with Lila, the sound of her laughter, the way she used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. And now this child Sophie, standing in his lobby with eyes that might hold echoes of his own. By afternoon, he could no longer sit still. He paced the office, then the corridor, finally returning to his desk. His assistant asked if he was ready for the quarterly review. He shook his head. "Cancel it? Cause Yes, I have something else to attend to." As the office door closed, Ethan sank back into his chair. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but the thought gnawed at him. If Sophie truly was his daughter, then he had been absent from her life for 8 long years. And if she wasn't, if this was some cruel trick, why did the possibility stir something so deep in him? He pressed his hands together, elbows on the desk, eyes shut. The city moved on, without him. Horns honked. People hurried. Planes climbed into the sky. But for Ethan, time had slowed. The letter lay between his hands, a simple piece of paper that threatened to unravel everything. The envelope landed on Ethan's mahogany desk. His assistant frowned. "Sir, a child left this for you." Ethan tore the seal and began to read, his hand trembling. The office felt unusually still after Ethan had read the letter for the 3rd time. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston Harbor gleamed in the afternoon light. Ferries slicing across the water, seagulls drifting in the air. The skyline was alive, but inside, Ethan's thoughts swirled with memories he had tried to bury. He traced the handwriting with his finger as though the ink itself carried Lila's voice. "She is your daughter." The line echoed inside him, impossible to ignore. He leaned back in his chair, his heart thudding in a way no quarterly report had ever caused. Vivian entered without knocking, her perfume arriving before her words. "Ethan, the investors from New York are waiting on a callback." Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, the voice of someone who never let emotion interfere. "I'll call them later," Ethan said, his voice distant. Vivian tilted her head. "Later? That's not like you." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing at the letter in his hand. "Is this still about that envelope from the lobby?" Ethan didn't answer, but she read enough in his expression. A flash of annoyance crossed her face. "You can't seriously believe this. It's a setup, Ethan. I've seen this play before, single mothers desperate for money, dragging children into boardrooms like bargaining chips. Don't let yourself be played." Her words stung, not because he fully believed them, but because they stirred old doubts. The doctors, the verdict that had haunted him, infertile. Years ago, he had accepted it, telling himself that destiny had chosen for him. He had buried the part of himself that longed for family. But now a little girl had appeared, carrying a letter that felt like both accusation and invitation. He looked up at Vivian, his jaw tight. "Her name is Sophie." Vivian crossed her arms. "And you're ready to throw away everything for her? For some ghost from your past?" The name Lila hung unspoken between them. Vivian pressed on, her voice hardening. "Don't forget, Ethan. I've stood by you these last 2 years. I know what people say about you, cold, distant, ruthless. I've helped balance that image. Don't ruin everything chasing after fairy tales." Ethan turned toward the window again, unwilling to let her see the conflict on his face. Boston's skyline stretched endlessly, yet all he could picture was a younger version of himself walking with Lila through Harvard Square. He remembered the crisp air, the sound of street musicians. The way her laughter warmed him more than any glass of wine ever could. He remembered promising her he'd always come back, and then breaking that promise when business swallowed him whole. "I need to see her," he murmured, almost to himself. Vivian stiffened. "See who?" "Lila." "That girl?" "Both." Her eyes flashed with anger. "And if you do this, Ethan, don't expect me to stand by quietly. You'll destroy your reputation. The press will eat it alive. Investors will question your judgment." He finally met her gaze, his voice low but firm. "Some things matter more than investors." Vivian's lips parted, ready to argue, but she stopped. For the first time, she realized Ethan wasn't talking as the CEO she knew, but as a man wrestling with something deeper. She shook her head, muttering, "This is madness," and stormed out, her heels striking the floor like accusations. The door shut, leaving Ethan alone with the hum of the city. He sat in silence for a long time, the letter still in his hand. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Expensive suit, carefully combed hair, the image of success. But beneath it, he saw a man hollowed out by choices, a man standing at the edge of a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to face. He whispered into the empty office, as if the city might answer, "If she really is mine, what then?" By late afternoon, the light in Ethan's office had softened to a golden glow. He still hadn't moved far from his desk. The letter from Lila lay open, its edges beginning to curl. Each time he read it, he found himself pausing at the same sentence. "She deserves to know you." He rose and crossed to the bookshelf, pulling down a leather-bound photo album he hadn't touched in years. Dust clung to the spine. He opened it, and there she was, Lila, smiling under a canopy of autumn leaves, her dark hair whipping in the breeze. He remembered that day clearly. A walk through the Boston Common, vendors selling roasted chestnuts, children feeding ducks at the pond. She had held his arm, teasing him for checking his pager too often. "One day," she had said, "you'll learn there's more to life than work." He had laughed it off then. Now, the memory cut deep. The sound of the office door opening startled him. Vivian was back, her expression icy. "I spoke with the board. They're expecting answers, Ethan. If you disappear now—" "I'm not disappearing," he interrupted sharply. "I'm finding out the truth." She glared at him, her voice laced with disdain. "Truth? Or weakness? Do you realize how foolish you'll look chasing after some woman from the past? And a child that isn't yours?" Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. "You don't know that. The doctors knew it," she snapped. "Or have you forgotten?" The words hit their mark, reopening the old wound. For a moment, Ethan faltered, but then he thought of Sophie, standing small and brave in the lobby with her envelope. He thought of Lila's careful script, her plea for him to see. Something inside him shifted, resisting the cynicism Vivian poured into every syllable. "Get out, Vivian," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me. Leave." "End of tea." She stared at him, stunned, then spun on her heel and stormed out, her perfume lingering like smoke. The slam of the door reverberated through the office. Ethan stood there, his breath uneven. He returned to his desk and read the letter one last time, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his breast pocket, close to his heart. He knew what he had to do. That evening, as the city lights began to twinkle, Ethan took the elevator down to the lobby. Grace, the receptionist, was still at her desk, typing quietly. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Sir?" "The little girl from this morning," Ethan asked. His voice was rougher than he intended. "Do you know where she went?" Grace hesitated, then shook her head. "She didn't say, but she seemed like she lived nearby. East Boston, maybe? She mentioned her mom waiting at home." Ethan nodded slowly, processing the hint. "Thank you, Grace." As he stepped outside, the chill of evening air wrapped around him. The city was alive with people heading to dinner, taxis honking, the scent of clam chowder drifting from a restaurant on the corner. But Ethan barely noticed. He was consumed by the thought of Lila, of Sophie, and of the possibility that his life was about to be rewritten. Back in his penthouse, he poured himself another glass of wine but didn't drink it. Instead, he sat at his desk, staring at the skyline, the letter still pressed against his chest. His empire, his reputation, All the things he had guarded so fiercely, they felt strangely fragile now, like glass waiting to shatter. His reflection stared back at him from the window. Not the polished CEO, but a man haunted by choices and yearning for a chance to undo them. The clock ticked toward midnight. Ethan rose, pacing the room, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He muttered aloud as though convincing himself, "I need to see her. I need to know the truth." The next day brought a sharp wind off the harbor, carrying the smell of salt and diesel from the ferries. Ethan left his glass tower behind, stepping into a part of Boston he hadn't visited in years. East Boston was a world apart from Back Bay, and the penthouse suites, narrow streets lined with brick apartments, small shops with hand-painted signs, the aroma of bagels and strong coffee drifting from corner delis. Neighbors leaned out of windows to call to one another, and children darted between parked cars, chasing a soccer ball. Ethan's tailored overcoat and polished shoes drew glances. He looked out of place here, and he knew it. For a man used to chauffeured cars and quiet lobbies, the closeness of East Boston felt overwhelming. Yet as he walked, he noticed details he had forgotten. Laundry strung between balconies, a radio playing Sinatra from an open window, the smell of tomato sauce simmering somewhere. It was messy, but it was alive. He found the building after asking a shopkeeper for directions. It was a modest 3-story walk-up, the paint peeling, but geraniums bloomed in pots along the windowsills. A little girl's chalk drawings covered the sidewalk stick figures, holding hands, a son with a wide smile, the word home scrawled in bright pink. Ethan stopped, staring at the letters. His throat tightened. Gathering himself, he climbed the steps and knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Lila Dawson. Time had changed her, etching lines of weariness on her face, but her eyes were the same, deep, steady, with a quiet strength. She leaned against the frame, her cardigan worn, her breathing faintly labored. "Ethan," she said softly. For a moment, neither moved. Years of silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Ethan swallowed hard. "Lila, it's been a long time." She gave a small nod, too long. Then, with a faint smile tinged with sadness, she stepped back. "Come in." Inside, the apartment was small but warm. The walls were dotted with children's drawings, and the smell of something sweet cinnamon maybe hung in the air. A bookshelf sagged under the weight of used paperbacks, and a quilt draped over the sofa looked handmade, its edges frayed. Ethan felt a pang. This was not luxury, not wealth, but it was home. The kind of home he hadn't known in decades. Sophie peeked out from behind the sofa, her eyes wide. She held a stuffed rabbit with one ear nearly torn off. When she saw Ethan, she hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. "Hi," she said. Ethan bent slightly, unsure of what to do with his hands. "Hi, Sophie." She studied him with a seriousness unusual for a child, then glanced at her mother. Lila's hand rested gently on Sophie's shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart. This is Ethan." The girl's gaze returned to him. "You're him, the man from Mom's stories." Ethan's chest tightened. "Stories?" Sophie nodded. "She told me about you, that you were smart and stubborn, and that you once bought her hot chocolate every day for a week because you spilled hers by accident." The faintest smile tugged at her lips. Ethan's memory jolted the cafe near Harvard Square, the clumsy moment with the cup, Lila's laughter as he insisted on replacing it each morning. He almost laughed now, but the sound caught in his throat. Lila motioned toward the sofa. "Sit, Ethan. We should talk." Ethan lowered himself onto the sofa, feeling strangely awkward in the cozy space. The leather seats and glass tables of his penthouse seemed galaxies away from this quilt-covered couch and the faint hum of a radiator. Sophie settled into the armchair across from him, hugging her rabbit close. Lila moved slowly to the kitchen and poured tea into mismatched mugs, her movements careful, as though her body no longer obeyed her with ease. She placed one mug in front of Ethan. "Chamomile," she said simply. "I don't keep scotch here." He managed a small smile. "That's fine." They sat in silence for a moment, the steam from the mugs curling upward. Ethan searched for words, but none seemed adequate. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Lila, why now? After all these years?" Her eyes flickered downward. "Because time isn't as kind as we pretend. I've been sick, Ethan. The doctors, they say it's my heart. I don't know how long I have. She placed a hand on her chest, then glanced at Sophie. She deserves to know where she comes from. And you, her voice broke for a moment before steadying, you deserve the chance to know her. The words struck Ethan with a force he hadn't expected. He looked at Sophie, who was tracing patterns on her rabbit's fur. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed curious, almost hopeful. Is it true? Ethan asked quietly. That she's mine? Lila's gaze lifted, unwavering. Yes. Look at her smile, Ethan. It's yours. Sophie looked up then, as if on cue, and gave the smallest, shyest grin. Ethan felt something inside him stir, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. He wanted to deny it, to cling to the certainty the doctors had given him, but her eyes, her mannerisms, they whispered of a connection deeper than science. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Lila's hands tightened around her mug. Because when I tried, you were already gone. You had your company, your empire, and I was afraid. Afraid you'd dismiss me. Afraid you'd see her as a burden. So I raised her alone. She paused, her face lined with exhaustion but also dignity. But I can't leave this world without giving her the truth. The room fell quiet. Outside, the rumble of a passing bus shook the window panes, and a dog barked somewhere down the street. Life continued in East Boston as it always did. But inside, the three of them sat on the edge of something fragile and immense. Sophie climbed down from the chair and padded over to Ethan, holding out a piece of paper. It was a drawing, done in bright crayons. 3 figures holding hands beneath a smiling Sunday. I made this, she said softly. It's me, Mom. And you. Ethan stared at the picture, his throat tight. His hand trembled as he accepted it. For a long time he couldn't speak. Lila watched him carefully, her voice a whisper. You see, she's always known. Ethan froze, torn between denial and belief. Sophie's expectant eyes shone up at him, waiting for an answer, for recognition. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt utterly unprepared. A man who had conquered markets, but was powerless in the face of a child's simple hope. He remained still, the crayon drawing clutched in his hand, as if holding it might somehow anchor him to a truth he wasn't ready to face. The following morning, Ethan found himself walking through the sterile corridors of Massachusetts General Hospital. The scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, and the faint hum of machines underscored the steady rhythm of footsteps. He had arranged the appointment quietly, away from board meetings and watchful eyes. His world of marble lobbies and executive lounges felt far away here. This place dealt with truths money could not negotiate. Beside him, Lila walked slowly, her breathing shallow but steady. Sophie clutched her hand, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her other arm. Ethan kept a respectful distance as they moved through the waiting area, past rows of patients sipping coffee from paper cups. Families sat together, murmuring, holding hands. Ethan caught himself staring, uneasy, at the kind of intimacy he had long forgotten. Dr. Marcus Hale, a calm man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, greeted them with a reassuring smile. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Dawson, Sophie. He crouched slightly to Sophie's level. Are you ready, young lady? Sophie looked up, her grip tightening on her rabbit. Will it hurt? Just a quick swab, Dr. Hale said gently. Like brushing your teeth, only faster. Sophie nodded bravely. Ethan felt his chest tighten at her courage. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without breaking a sweat, yet watching this little girl face something unknown unsettled him deeply. As Sophie followed the nurse into a small room, Ethan and Lila remained in the hallway. Lila's hands twisted in her lap. I hate that it has to come to this, she murmured. Ethan looked down, conflicted. I need certainty, Lila. You dropped this on me after years. I can't. He stopped himself, the frustration fading when he saw the weariness in her face. I need to know. Lila met his eyes, her voice soft but firm. Certainty doesn't change what's in her heart. She already sees you as her father. Before Ethan could respond, Vivian's voice cut through the hallway. She strode toward them in a navy suit, her heels sharp against the tile. Ethan stiffened. "Vivian, what are you doing here?" "I heard," she said simply, her gaze flicking to Lila with cool disdain. "You think secrets don't travel quickly in this city? You should know better." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This isn't your concern." Vivian stepped closer, her tone low. "Everything you do is my concern. The company's image is my concern. You can't just let some woman stroll in with a child and claim she's yours. Do you realize the headlines?" Lila straightened, despite her frailty. "I didn't come for headlines. I came for truth." Vivian's lip curled, but she said nothing more. Instead, as the nurse returned with Sophie, Vivian turned away, pulling out her phone. Ethan noticed her whispering to someone, her hand slipping something discreetly into another's palm. A lab technician walked past moments later, eyes darting nervously. Ethan frowned but said nothing, distracted by Sophie tugging at his sleeve. "All done," she announced, holding up her rabbit triumphantly. "Doctor," Hale smiled warmly, "we'll have results soon." As they left the hospital, Sophie's small hand brushed against Ethan's. He hesitated before letting his fingers curl gently around hers. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a jolt through him all the same. 2 days later, Ethan returned to the hospital with Lila and Sophie. The November sky was low and gray, and the wind off the harbor carried a bitter chill. Sophie walked between them, her rabbit tucked under her arm, the strap of her little backpack bouncing with each step. Ethan tried to appear calm, but inside he was a storm. Dr. Hale met them in his office, papers in hand. His usual warmth was subdued. "I have the results," he said gently. He gestured for them to sit. Ethan lowered himself into the chair beside Lila, while Sophie perched on the edge of hers, swinging her feet nervously. The silence stretched before Dr. Hale finally spoke. "The test indicates no biological relation." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. Lila's breath caught. Sophie blinked rapidly, her mouth opening, then closing again. "No, that can't be," she whispered, clutching her rabbit tighter. "Mom said," her eyes filled with tears. Ethan stared at the paper Dr. Hale laid on the desk. Numbers, charts, and a single conclusion. Negative. His stomach twisted. All the walls he had begun to lower slammed back into place. He looked at Lila, whose face had gone pale, then at Sophie, whose small shoulders shook with sobs. Vivian stood near the door, arms crossed, a sharp smile ghosting across her lips. "I told you," she said softly, just loud enough for Ethan to hear. "This was a mistake. She's not yours." Lila turned sharply toward Vivian, her voice trembling with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about." Vivian raised a brow, feigning innocence. "The test speaks for itself." Sophie's sobs broke into hiccups. "But I know he's my dad. I just know." She buried her face in her rabbit's worn ear. Ethan felt torn apart. Every instinct screamed to reach for her, to comfort her, but doubt clawed at him. The doctors years ago, the results now. He pressed a hand to his temple, unable to form words. Dr. Hale's voice was calm but firm. "Sometimes tests can be influenced. Contaminated samples, errors." Vivian cut in smoothly. "Or sometimes, the truth is just hard to swallow." The tension in the room grew unbearable. Lila reached for Sophie, holding her close. "Shh, sweetheart. No matter what, I'm here. I always will be." Sophie's muffled voice broke through the fabric of Lila's cardigan. "But he doesn't want me!" The words sliced through Ethan. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "I need air." Without another glance, he walked out of the office, down the sterile corridor, his footsteps echoing. In the waiting room, families sat together, children leaning against parents, hands intertwined. Ethan paused, staring at the scene. He felt like an outsider looking through glass at a world he could never enter. Outside, the cold air struck him like a slap. He walked blindly down the hospital steps, past the honking taxis, past the vendors selling hot pretzels, until he stopped at the corner. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the letter still tucked in his pocket, close to his heart. Behind him, Lila held Sophie, whispering comfort. Vivian lingered near the entrance, her voice carrying faintly as she said to Ethan's retreating figure, "I told you, she's not yours." And for the first time in decades, Ethan wasn't sure if he wanted to believe the numbers or the little girl's unwavering eyes. The rain came that evening, tapping steadily against the windows of Lila's small East Boston apartment. The sky was a sheet of gray, the streets slick and shining under street lamps. Ethan hesitated at the doorway, coat damp from the walk up the block. He hadn't planned to come after the test. He had sworn to distance himself. But something in Sophie's words, in her tearful insistence that she knew he was her father, had followed him like an echo he couldn't shake. Lila opened the door with a tired smile. Her cardigan was buttoned wrong, her face drawn, but her eyes softened when she saw him. "I didn't think you'd come back." Ethan removed his hat, shaking off the rain. "Neither did I." The apartment smelled of macaroni and cheese, baked from a box, but warm and comforting. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, crayons spread before her, a half-finished drawing of 3 figures under a rainbow. She looked up, startled, then wary. Her rabbit sat beside the crayons, one ear patched clumsily with a bandage of tape. Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of his place. Lila pulled out a chair. "You might as well sit. Supper's simple, but there's enough." He lowered himself into the chair across from Sophie. For a long moment, she stared at him, eyes wide, as if weighing whether to speak. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you leave at the hospital?" The question pierced deeper than he expected. He searched for words. I didn't know what to do, Sophie." "The test said—" "The test was wrong," she interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't care what it said. I know." She jabbed at the drawing with her crayon. "I know because when you came in, I felt it here." She pressed her small hand to her chest. Ethan's breath caught. He looked at the child so certain, so earnest, and saw not evidence, not paperwork, but conviction, pure as sunlight. Lila placed a hand over Sophie's, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart." But Sophie shook her head. "No, Mom. He needs to hear it." She turned back to Ethan. "Our eyes are the same. Mom told me that when I was born, she thought I looked just like you. And I say grace before supper, just like Grandma taught Mom. Don't you see?" Ethan blinked, startled. "Grace?" Sophie nodded seriously. "Want to hear?" Without waiting, she clasped her hands. "Thank you for this food, and for my mom, and thank you for letting me meet him." Her voice wavered on the last word, but she finished firmly. The room fell silent except for the patter of rain. Ethan felt his throat tighten, a lump forming that no amount of logic could dissolve. He leaned back, trying to steady himself. "Sophie, His voice cracked and he stopped, staring at the table. All the boardrooms, all the contracts, all the trophies of success. None of them had ever undone him like this small girl with taped-up ears on her rabbit and faith stronger than any lab result. Dinner was served in simple bowls, macaroni and cheese with a sprinkle of breadcrumbs, a side of green beans boiled just enough to keep their color. Ethan stared at his plate, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd sat down to a meal that wasn't ordered from a menu by someone else. Sophie bowed her head again, whispering a quick prayer. Lila smiled faintly, then nudged Ethan. "You don't have to," she said softly. But Ethan surprised himself by murmuring, "Maybe I should." He cleared his throat, repeating the words haltingly. The act felt foreign, yet strangely grounding. Sophie beamed. "Zay, I told you." Ethan tried the food. It wasn't gourmet, but it tasted of care, of home. Between bites, Sophie began talking about her school, about how she loved drawing, about her best friend Emily who lived down the hall. Ethan listened more intently than he had in years. Her small stories painted a world vibrant and fragile, one he realized he had been absent from all along. When supper ended, Sophie darted to her room and returned with another drawing. This one showed a tall man holding hands with a little girl in front of a house with flowers in the yard. "That's us," she explained, shy but proud. "I drew it yesterday, before the hospital. I just knew you'd come." Ethan's hand trembled as he accepted the picture. He saw himself rendered in crayon lines, not as a CEO, not in a boardroom, but simply as a father. The image struck him harder than any headline or report. Just then, his phone buzzed on the table. Vivian's name flashed across the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "Where are you?" her voice demanded. "With Lila and Sophie," he said quietly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Ethan, listen to me." This has gone far enough. You're risking everything. The press will eat this alive, and the board will not forgive you. Choose them, and you lose everything we've built." Ethan's eyes drifted to Sophie, who was giggling softly as she showed Lila how she'd fixed her rabbit's ear with tape. His chest tightened. For the first time, Vivian's threats sounded small compared to the laughter in that room. "I'll call you back," he said firmly, ending the call before she could respond. Lila studied him quietly. "She'll never understand, Ethan. Not the way Sophie does." He nodded slowly, staring at the drawing in his hand. For years, he had convinced himself he was incapable of family. Yet here, in a modest apartment on a rainy night, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades: belonging. Sophie climbed onto the sofa beside him, leaning against his arm without hesitation. "Don't be sad," she whispered. "I know you're my dad, even if papers say no." The words undid him. Ethan felt his eyes burn, but he didn't hide it. He placed an arm carefully around her small shoulders. She fit there, as if she had always belonged. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle, the street lamps casting halos on the wet pavement. Inside, for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to sit still, not as a CEO, not as a man haunted by the past, but as someone on the edge of becoming a father. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, with low clouds clinging to the skyline of Seattle. Ethan's penthouse windows reflected a city caught between storms, as though the world itself mirrored his restless mind. He hadn't slept. Instead, he had sat in his armchair with Sophie's drawing on his lap, running his thumb again and again over the crayon lines of a father holding his daughter's hand. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Carter, his longtime physician. "Results are in. Call me when ready." Ethan stared at the text, his heart pounding. For years he had believed himself sterile, unfit for fatherhood. The science had seemed irrefutable, and yet Sophie's eyes, they were his eyes. Before he could call, his doorbell chimed. When he opened it, Vivian strode in uninvited, dressed in a sharp cream suit, her heels striking the floor like gavel blows. "You look terrible," she said briskly. "Have you slept at all?" "I had things on my mind," Ethan replied flatly. Vivian dropped her designer bag onto the sofa. "Then let me clear your mind. I had some inquiries made, and the child, Sophie, is not yours. The test proves it." She held up a folder, too quick, too rehearsed. Ethan frowned. "That's impossible. Dr. Carter just texted me this morning." Her smile was tight. "Doctors make mistakes, or mothers lie. Either way, you don't need this distraction." The words scraped across him. He had seen Vivian's ambition before, but never so bare. Never so cold. "Vivian," he said slowly, "why are you so determined to erase them from my life?" "Because you don't see what's at stake," she snapped. "The board is restless. Investors are watching. If you get tangled in some sob story about a dying woman and her child, you jeopardize everything. And She stopped, catching herself, but not before the truth slipped. "I've fought too long to let Nancy's shadow take you away again." Ethan froze. The room seemed to tilt. "You," he whispered. 8 years ago. The photos, the phone calls, that was you?" Vivian's eyes flickered, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she straightened, her jaw set. "I protected you. You would have destroyed yourself chasing a fantasy. I made sure you stayed focused, stayed strong. You should thank me." He felt the blood drain from his face. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. All those wasted years of bitterness, all those lonely nights in his empty penthouse because of her. His phone buzzed again on the table, the screen lighting up with Dr. Carter's name. Ethan grabbed it like a lifeline. "Mike," he said, voice hoarse. "Ethan, doctor," Carter replied gently. "I wanted to tell you personally. We ran the test twice, even sent it to an independent lab. There's no doubt. Sophie is your daughter, 99.97% probability. She's yours." Ethan's knees buckled, and he sank into the nearest chair. Relief and anguish crashed through him in equal measure. All the years he had believed he could never be a father, all the distance he had forced into his life, it had been a lie. Sophie was his. Across the room, Vivian's face went pale. "That can't be," she whispered. That's impossible." Ethan looked at her with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. No, Vivian. What's impossible is you keeping me from my family any longer. Vivian's composure cracked, though she tried desperately to patch it with icy control. Ethan, listen to me. You don't have to make a rash decision. We can spin this, handle the press. No, he interrupted, his voice firmer than it had been in years. This isn't about the press. This isn't about the company. This is about a little girl who walked into my office carrying a letter because her mother was too sick to deliver it herself. Sophie is mine, Vivian, and I will not let anyone, least of all, you erase her from my life. Vivian's eyes flashed. After everything I've done for you? After the sacrifices I made? You didn't sacrifice, Ethan said coldly. You stole. You stole 8 years of my life. You stole a chance for me to know my daughter when she was learning her first words, taking her first steps. You chose ambition over honesty, and now you've lost both. For a moment, she looked smaller, deflated in a way Ethan had never seen, but the softness lasted only seconds. With a bitter laugh, she grabbed her bag. You'll regret this, she hissed, before slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was heavy but strangely freeing. Ethan stood still, his breath shallow, until he caught sight of Sophie's drawing on the coffee table. A crayon family, hand in hand beneath a crooked sundae. That was what mattered now. He grabbed his coat and drove across the city, the rain clearing into shafts of late afternoon light. His chest pounded with anticipation and fear as he parked outside Lila's apartment. When she opened the door, surprise flickered across her tired face. Ethan? Did something happen? He stepped inside, his voice trembling but resolute. The test came back. Sophie is my daughter. There's no doubt. Lila's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled instantly. I told you she was yours. I know. His own throat tightened. I should have trusted you sooner. I let other voices cloud the truth. But not anymore. At that moment, Sophie emerged from her room, clutching her rabbit. Daddy? She asked, hesitantly, as though testing the word. Ethan dropped to one knee, opening his arms. Yes, sweetheart, Daddy. She ran into him with a force that nearly toppled him, her little arms locking around his neck. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of crayons and shampoo, and felt his world finally click into place. Over Sophie's shoulder, Lila stood frozen, tears streaking her cheeks. Ethan reached out his free hand toward her. I can't change the past, he said softly, but I can fight for the future. For both of you. Sophie pulled back just enough to beam up at him. Does that mean you'll stay forever? Ethan's eyes met Lila's. She hesitated, fear and hope warring within her. Then, slowly, she nodded. Yes, Ethan whispered, kissing Sophie's forehead. Forever. The weight of years slipped from his shoulders. In that small apartment, with its second-hand furniture and taped-up drawings on the fridge, Ethan Barton finally found what no penthouse or corporate empire had given him: home. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Ethan had never known before. Instead of early board meetings and late-night strategy calls, he found himself at a small kitchen table in Capitol Hill, helping Sophie with her math homework, while Lila sipped tea across from them. His expensive watch ticked away on his wrist, but for once, time felt less like an enemy and more like a gift. Each morning he brought fresh groceries from the market down the street, surprising Sophie with strawberries or muffins from the local bakery. She had a habit of saving the last piece for him, even when it was her favorite. That's what families do, she explained with simple certainty. At night, he read to her from a stack of children's books she proudly displayed on her shelf. His voice faltered. At first, he hadn't read aloud in years, but Sophie nestled under his arm, her head on his shoulder, and the words came easier. When she giggled at the funny parts, or whispered questions about the story, something inside him healed. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Lila stepped out onto the small balcony where Ethan was leaning against the railing. The city lights glittered below them, and the faint hum of traffic rose from the streets. She's happier, Lila murmured, her voice a mixture of relief and wonder. Even with everything going on, she's lighter when you're around. Ethan turned toward her. The soft glow from the kitchen behind them caught the weariness etched in her face, but also the quiet strength that had carried her this far. And you? He asked gently. She hesitated. I'm tired, Ethan. More tired than I want to admit. But having you here, it feels like I'm not carrying it all alone anymore. Ugh. He reached for her hand, holding it carefully, as though it might break. You'll never carry it alone again. The next morning, Ethan drove them to the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. The sterile brightness of the hospital corridors once filled him with dread, but now he saw them as halls of possibility. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Lila's latest test suggested the new treatment was beginning to slow the cancer's spread. As they left the appointment, Sophie tugged on Ethan's hand. "Does that mean Mommy will get better?" she asked, her eyes wide. Ethan crouched to meet her gaze. "It means we're fighting, sweetheart, and we're going to keep fighting together." Sophie nodded solemnly, then slipped her small hand back into his. "I'm glad you're here. Mommy used to cry at night when she thought I was asleep. Now she smiles more." The words pierced him deeper than any accusation Vivian had ever thrown. He squeezed Sophie's hand gently. "Then I'll make sure she keeps smiling." That night, as he tucked Sophie into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, can we stay like this forever?" Ethan brushed her hair back from her forehead. "Forever, sweetheart. I promise." In the quiet that followed, he realized the empire he had built, the skyscrapers, the contracts, the endless meetings suddenly seemed small compared to the empire of trust he was building here, in a tiny apartment with a child who believed in him and a woman who had once loved him despite everything. 2 weeks later, the Barton penthouse looked nothing like it once had. Where sterile glass and chrome had dominated, now Sophie's drawings covered the refrigerator. A row of potted plants lined the balcony, and a pair of well-worn sneakers lay by the door. For the first time, Ethan's home felt lived in. That evening, he prepared dinner himself, pasta with tomato sauce, garlic bread, and a simple salad. He wasn't much of a cook, but Sophie clapped her hands as though it were a feast fit for royalty. "Best dinner ever," she declared, crumbs of bread on her cheeks. After dinner, Ethan excused himself for a moment and returned with a small velvet box in his pocket. His palms were damp, his heart racing in a way no corporate deal had ever managed to stir. He found Sophie and Lila curled on the sofa, reading from one of Sophie's picture books. The sight stopped him. Lila's arm wrapped around Sophie, Sophie leaning into her mother with complete trust. It was everything he had lost for 8 years, and everything he had now found again. Ethan knelt down in front of them, his voice soft but steady. "Sophie, sweetheart, I need your help with something important." Her eyes lit up. "A project?" "Something like that." He pulled out the velvet box and opened it slowly. The diamond ring inside caught the light, sparkling with quiet promise. Sophie gasped, "It's for Mommy!" Lila's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes before Ethan could even speak. "Lila," he said, his voice thick with emotion, 8 years ago, I lost you because I believed lies. I let pride and fear steal the life we could have had. But today, I know the truth. You gave me the greatest gift, our daughter, and you carried the weight alone when it should have been ours to share. I don't want to waste another moment. Will you marry me? Will you let me make this right not just for you, but for Sophie, for us?" Lila's tears spilled freely as Sophie squealed with delight, bouncing on the sofa. "Say yes, Mommy! Say yes!" With trembling hands, Lila nodded. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his own eyes wet, and pulled her into his arms. Sophie wrapped herself around them both, declaring, "We're a real family now." Laughter mingled with tears, echoing through the once lonely penthouse. Weeks later, at a small ceremony in a chapel overlooking Elliott Bay, Ethan and Lila exchanged vows. Sophie, dressed in a pale blue dress, scattered rose petals down the aisle, her grin wide enough to light the room. Dr. Carter, their physician and now close friend, officiated, speaking about the healing power of truth and the importance of second chances. When Ethan said his vows, he turned not just to Lila but also to Sophie. "I promise to be the husband you deserve, Lila, and the father you need, Sophie. No boardroom, no storm, no lie will ever come between us again." Applause filled the chapel as they sealed their vows with a kiss, Sophie cheering the loudest. That night, standing on the balcony together, Ethan looked out over the city lights. For years, those lights had represented ambition and isolation. Now, with Lila's hand in his and Sophie dancing in the living room behind them, They represented something far greater: belonging. Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "Sometimes the hardest battles are not in boardrooms, but in our own hearts. And sometimes redemption comes not with contracts, but with forgiveness and love." Lila leaned against him, her smile radiant. "And family," she added softly. He kissed her forehead, holding her close as Sophie's laughter drifted out through the open door. For the first time, Ethan Barton understood the true measure of success: not wealth, not power, but the ability to mend what was broken and to build a home with those who mattered most. And so, under the glow of the city that had once felt like a prison, Ethan found freedom in love, in forgiveness, and in the unshakable strength of family. The story we've just walked through together is not about contracts, fortunes, or skyscrapers. It is about something much quieter and far more lasting. A little girl's faith, a mother's strength, and a man who dared to step back into the light after years of walking alone. Picture the last evening we left them, with Sophie's laughter spilling into the room, Lila leaning into Ethan's shoulder, and a simple family dinner that tasted richer than any banquet he had ever attended. It's in moments like that, my friends, that the true measure of a life is revealed. And I wonder, as you sit listening now, do you feel it too? If you think this story touched your heart, leave a number 1 in the comments. If not, or if you have another thought to share, press 0 and let us know. Because the lesson here is timeless. Love can repair what pride once shattered, and forgiveness can build bridges stronger than any steel. A family may be broken by lies, but it can be healed by truth and tenderness. And isn't that the way it so often is in our own lives? We cannot change the years we've lost, but we can choose how to live the ones still ahead. Like the glow of a porch light on a long road home, even the smallest act of kindness can guide us through the darkest night. Maybe it brings back memories for you, the way your family gathered for Sunday supper, or the sound of a grandchild running down the hallway. Those are the treasures that outlast wealth or titles. We leave behind not the numbers in our bank account, but the moments when we chose love over fear, presence over ambition. Just as Sophie's crayon drawing held more truth than any document, so too do our small daily choices: sharing a meal, holding a hand, offering forgiveness, hold the power to define us. So let this story settle in your heart tonight as more than entertainment. Let it be a reminder that happiness is rarely found in what we own, but in who we walk beside. And if you've been holding on to regret, perhaps it's time to set it down and to reach out once more to the people who matter most. If this story touched you, I invite you to carry its warmth into your own home. Share it with a neighbor, reflect on it during your evening walk, or tell it over coffee at the diner down the street. And if it left a mark on your heart, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next story we'll tell, because each one, in its own way, is a gentle light meant to guide us closer to each other.